parts and a picture of a rat opened up, they would drag these things around. That's right. And it would give them a state. And so you'd say, okay, I'm ready, I have to go. And we'd say, no, that's wrong. And then they'd do it again, and no, that's wrong. And then they get 2 or 3 tries. Okay. So in other words, they'd either get closer or further away. And then it would say, because of our interfacing request, it would say, okay, you've given answer number 3, and you've entered 3 in. And the request would score that. So 3 would be worth, say, half a credit or something. We did another one where we created a mask where we were asking them about a critical area. It's the equivalent of drawing around something. And so we created a mask, which was a layer over the image that we were showing them, and they would drag this to highlight what part of the cell, what part of the plant structure we're referring to with this story. And so we did that. And of course, we did hundreds and hundreds of questions that are just multiple choice questions.
For what purpose? What was this for? A course? What was
For a course.
Okay. For a course here.
At UT.
Yes. Is that an introductory course?
It was a lab course.
Okay.
And these were quizzes they took before they went into the lab and after they came out.
So this was part of, I mean, you did this as well as a part of the lab, right?
Oh, yeah. So this is prior to entering into the lab. This was a way to force them into. On top of that, we had a way for Quest to go to our server. So I run a website with Quest, and it houses lots of videos. The Quest server couldn't handle video, but our server could. So what we did is we had a way to create a container in Quest.
So, welcome to our third
to train them.
and final Quest demo seminar. Today, our topic is Web Mathematica and new question types. So I'll start with our new question types. For those of you that haven't used Quest before, we have our normal multiple choice question type that we've always had. And remember that we still randomize our parameters and everything like that. We can change pictures in our questions. We can change numbers in our questions, and then we also scramble our choices. So this is a lot of our question set. But we've also developed several other types over the last year. The first type that we have is a short answer, meaning that we can now accept text submissions from the student. So you can ask a student, what types of asymptotes does this function have? And they can submit either vertical or vertical asymptotes. Those are both acceptable, those are both fine, and we would grade those both as the same. So for the first time in our Quest lives, we have more than one correct answer that we are allowing. Yes?
Now, if someone misspells vertical?
Bad news for them.
How do we know which are the acceptable answers?
So the editor who codes the question says these are acceptable.
How does a student know?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, how does a student know whether to write x equals a, or vertical asymptote, or what?
So if you
Vertical
were,
or what?
so if you were posing that question to them, what kinds of asymptotes does this have? Presumably your graph would have just one kind of asymptote, vertical, and so
But
you
you've
would
got,
answer
you've got
either.
telegraph the,
Yeah,
you've
I
got
mean,
yeah,
you have, there has to be a clear answer there.
okay.
Does that make sense? Okay, so this is our short answer question body. We can also accept things like, what's the name of this compound? Presumably, chemistry, you have different names for compounds, right? They can have different names. So we can accept either or all of the names that are correct there. It depends on how though the person codes that question. We've also moved on to
Can I stop you quickly?
Yeah.
And you're allowed to assign different values for the answers that are given. In other words, if they've got it correct, they get 5 points. If they gave this answer, they would get 3 points.
No. So what we do allow is multiple tries. And so if you get it right on the first try, maybe you get 10 points. If you get it right on the second try, maybe you get 7. But there's no gradation of points for different answers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can also accept function expression type answers. So for this particular question, the correct answer is this quadratic expression. And we can accept that as the correct answer. We can accept this, anything that is algebraically equivalent. All of those are considered totally fine and okay. So our ability to validate the correctness of these kinds of things is fairly robust and exciting. We can also now accept answers that are ordered pairs or intervals because the notation is the same. So you can ask a question on what intervals is this function defined, and we can accept this as our answer. So you'll notice though that if you were to ask a question like what's the domain of the function, there's no union there, right? So right now we can only accept lists of these things. So we could say that the function is defined from -2 to 0, pi to 7, and we would appropriately deal with the open and closedness of the brackets. So this is, and the order doesn't matter here.
How do they type pi?
We'll get to that. We have a palette.
And you don't have to put braces or anything like that for this?
So this is different. For this, you have to have every ordered pair or every interval has to have an opening and a closing bracket, whether it's round or square. But there is another question type. So, before we move on, and again, we can accept things that are algebraically equivalent. So here, what would you call this? The order of the intervals that you submit doesn't matter. However, the order inside, of course, does. So we account for that. The other thing is that anything that is algebraically equivalent, not that you would want to do this, but a student could, if they wanted to, submit this as their answer, and that would be okay. Yes?
And once again, no partial credit if you get one interval and not the other.
So if you get one interval and not the other, it's counted as wrong, and you get to try again.
But you could code the question such that if there were multiple parts, you could ask separately for each part, and that would allow you to get partial credit.
That's
T. So it's a little bit of a onus on the question writer on how maybe you structure partial credits.
Okay, so we can also accept now, for those of you that are familiar with our numeric, yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to just think about the partial credit thing because it's come up twice now. There was a suggestion that, which I think we're working on at some point, which is to have a hints feature. And so just in the spirit of all kinds of possible partial credit, if faculty members wanted to code it with a question with a hints feature, like the student can't answer, and rather than just guess, click on a button here if you'd like a hint. You get a hint, and then you can proceed to answer, and maybe at lesser credit for the problem, you pay for the cost of getting a hint, and you could maybe get a couple hints, at which point there's no value left in the problem. And that was something that was seen on one of the other web platforms that we're going to try to implement sometime in the future. I don't know where that fits on your queue right now, Shane, but
You can start saving this.
I guess my question was partly, this may be very bad memory from early versions of Mathematica, but if you did a test, the set 1, 2 equals set 2, 3, it would return something like true, false. But I'm guessing now Mathematica no longer returns that, it just returns false.
So right now, we haven't, when we first implemented these, we call them algebraic response question types. When we first implemented these, we talked about whether we wanted to have or require set notation in our answers, and we decided not. So for this, even though you might be asking for a solution set, we are not requiring that the student enter the curly brackets, limiting the set. And this, the way that we decide whether it's true or not is we separate it at the commas, we take each piece individually and say, is it the same as something in the list that's defined as the correct answer? So the Mathematica part comes in deciding whether the elements are the same, not in the whole collection together. Does that make
So
sense?
you treat lists separately on your own.
Yes.
Your own
Yeah, we do a pre-parsing on them and separate.
Mathematica runs in the background, and then we deal with what Mathematica tells us, just whether it's right or wrong. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, but it means in principle you could have coded differently to pick out partial credit.
Yes.
So Mathematica thinks that lowercase arctangent of 1 is pi over 4?
Yes.
So, yeah, so then you could actually do this where Mathematica
Well, there's lots
could
of value.
be just looking through and seeing if it matches any element in the matrix and then scoring it that way. You could have Mathematica return a result that you could then score accordingly.
Yes.
That'd be a very fast way to get partial credit
But it's
within a
not
question.
implemented yet, okay.
It's not,
Well, and we also need somebody to decide on the problem editor level, what points are you going to give for this particular answer? And what points are you gonna give for this particular answer? So that's another sticky part.
Yeah, that would obviously be the question creator purview.
Any other questions? So, we can accept lists of answers, for example, what are the x-intercepts of this function, what are the solutions? And again, anything that is algebraically equivalent is okay. I think that when the types of functions that we now are comfortable with are trig functions, like sine, cosine, tangent, inverse trig functions, the common log, the natural log, square root, absolute value, and rational functions, and polynomials. So our list is pretty solid. We wanted to not in this first pass deal with integral signs or derivative signs or any of those kinds of things. But maybe in the future. Okay, so these are our new question types: short answer questions, function answers, intervals or ordered pairs, and then lists of numbers. To allow students to enter these answers in a nicer way, we also have a palette. So, for example, I can type 7x, and I can take the cosine of 7x. I can divide that by, say, the tangent function, maybe the tangent of pi. See, that's loud. So we can ask students to answer these questions in a way that's a little bit easier for them, more calculator-like, without requiring them to type by hand the cosine, all of the parentheses, the tangents, and use the appropriate syntax. Yes?
In terms of syntax, is the white space a concern?
No.
Cosine, okay.
No, and we also parse in a multiplication sign between the 7 and the x, so that is also not an issue. Any other questions about the palette?
Is it possible for students to muck this up by trying to put in their own multiplication sign?
Yeah. Well, it's possible for them to,
X will take time.
it's possible for them to type in something that's not about a valid function name, like they could say, they might mean the tangent of 7x, and maybe they submitted that, but that's not valid, and it's not a member of the palette, so we would count this as wrong if we were really looking for the tangent of 7x.
So is there a way to,
Yes!
is there a way to make it not wrong but not right? Like, please enter a valid function?
Yeah, so what we can do on the next page, what we can do, and this I think is particularly important with things that are fractions. Students, when they enter fractions in line, they frequently have a lot of issues with those. So here, if you typed 1 over x in your little window, we can have a preview button that shows you what it looks like as a fraction with a numerator over a denominator.
Is this,
And yeah.
so now change 1 over x to 1 over x plus 3 or whatever.
Right, so, oh look, I was messing with this earlier. So we can have something like this that has 1 over, it's kind of small, 1 over x plus 1 over x in the denominator, and we typeset that so that it looks like this, something that's a little bit more natural for a student to look at.
but the typesetting step should also have audits. You know, it's things that are so badly wrong that they won't even pass the syntax checker. We don't want to count off people.
So it might be that faculty will want to end every question with, be sure to typeset your answer first to make sure it looks like what you want, or some sort of
Yeah,
instruction
we're
to the
also
student.
hoping though that we can develop a culture that they know that they're supposed to typeset their answers before they submit.
Yes, and I'm saying fair warning to faculty, it's probably a good idea to end that culture with an instruction to the students, please typeset your answers so that you'll.
Oh, okay.
Let's not put anything on tape about that.
Yes.
Are you parsing pairs and asterisks, or how are you parsing them?
So this input is actually right now sent to Web Mathematica, and it's not, we we're not doing any parsing to it on the front end. So things like, if I were to switch the order of these things, or maybe put 1 over x plus, let's do this. I think this is the one that changes the order. So it will frequently change the order of things and put them in what it deems the correct order. And I'm not sure that, what we think of that. I don't know whether we would want the preview button to be exactly what they wrote, or whether we're okay with these kinds of transformations. Thoughts? Now that I have you here and you're captive?
Well, in terms of training students, they might eventually start answering the way that the typeset does, as long as they're equivalents.
They are always equivalent. The thing that it writes is equivalent to what they wrote, but it's not exactly the same. It's not verbatim what they wrote.
For example, Mathematica loves to put things, if you write x squared plus x plus 1, it loves to change that to 1 plus x plus x squared.
Yeah, it likes to change the order of things.
It has that, it's covered.
If you have 1 plus x on the bottom without the parentheses, will it shift the x up?
So what it does if I do that, like this,
Yes.
So now you have 1 plus
that-
x.
Oh, that's
it says
Yeah.
is
let's do
1
it.
plus
Let's-
x.
Okay. So it does.
Yeah, and, yes, and if we were submitting this as an algebraic free response answer, it would be counted like this.
That's actually educational in and of itself, so that's good.
So is this
That's the
acceptable?
biggest mistake with fractions.
Yes, the lack of parentheses.
So that's actually, I would probably change typeset to
Preview.
Yeah,
preview
so-
or check or.
My button image has been eaten by gremlins, I don't know where it is. But yeah, this needs to look different,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, the
No
function is
argument.
good, and we're just, we're
Oh,
now talking about sort of the user interface
Oh,
of
yeah, yeah.
how this looks like.
So this is, what we're talking about and showing today are pieces that still need to be put together. And there's a process that we still need to go through. But yeah, this piece needs to be put inside an actual question. There's no question here, as you can see.
How does this look in the editor?
How does what look
How
like?
does an editor create one of these questions?
Create an algebraic free response question? So the editing process is, so for those of you that have edited before, you know that there is a tech code block and then C code that deals with the randomization, whether your numbers, function names, or naming. Those two things look almost exactly the same as they did before. The tech code still looks the same and the C code looks the same, except for a couple of things. One, we're not using JavaScript, but you probably won't notice that change in your everyday coding. Two, the answers are defined in a special way. So really, everything looks almost exactly the same, except for when you get to defining your ANS 1 or 2 or whatever you're doing.
Could you answer the question for the folks who have never,
Yeah, do you want to
Use
look at
it.
one?
okay.
Are you sure?
Well,
Pretty sure.
So, I think I put my sample question.
It's loading.
It is loading. It's telling me it's loading.
You get a very large first page.
I don't think so. I think we're underneath this. While it's doing that, oh, there it is.
By the way, while you're loading that, on the splash page, why do you not give the login options, login as student, login as editor, login as instructor at that point?
What do you, which
On the splash page for Quest, which you go to Quest and then you get a splash page and you log in, you can then switch modes, editor, instructor view, whatever.
So instead you would rather log in, like you would rather pick your URL and then log into that?
Yeah, go to the splash page and then from there be able to log in as an editor or log in as an instructor. I'm not sure why you bother to do that.
Probably knowing that's where.
I just realized, do we want to turn the lights off? Can you see? Is everything on?
Can we turn off half?
We're held in the lights on.
Flip one of the switches.
Keep, keep, computer slides with that.
So this is what the editor for these looks like. my question preview. This is the tech code. We're still using plain text here.
I don't go so fast, I'm slow to read.
Okay,
So the editor actually has to specify the alternatives.
so this is a function answer, and no. This is what I wrote in my actual question, and I said, this is the right answer that I coded, and these are the things that would be considered
I see,
acceptable and
okay,
equivalent.
okay.
So this was something that I wrote purely for demo purposes.
But Mathematica is supplying those.
No, I supplied
No,
them
no, I
as-
agree, but whatever the student types in, Mathematica will combine.
Mathematica will say, is this the
Okay.
same? And so,
Give him a control plus. No, guess it's not gonna work.
no, I don't think so. If I highlight it and turn it dark, well, no. Okay, so the things that are different about this are that instead of your usual void answer void part, we have function JS answer, open parentheses, and then these brackets enclose your randomization things. We have the declaration of our ANS1. It's still a global, but its type is now free, indicating that it is a function expression answer. Defining ANS1, it's a string. I've enclosed it in quotation marks, and I've written pretty much what you would expect a student to write.
So you're not coding that in tech?
No,
What are you coding this?
JavaScript.
JavaScript?
Yeah.
Instead of C, it's JavaScript at the bottom.
so what happens is that this ANS1 gets sent to our parser, and, well, yes, it does get sent to the parser, and then the student input gets sent to the parser, and then.
But the body of the
they're combined.
question would be typed in tech.
Absolutely still. And you can still use the typesetting functions here, yes.
So for the entire west side of Seaway that's not familiar with using tech,
Yes, that would be left.
sorry. It is also the case that there's a palette which can be used to answer questions that one does not need to use this tech code, isn't that correct?
So
I
when
mean,
you
we
use,
saw that previewed back in May, and Shane
so,
walked us through that.
yeah, when we code this particular question type, we still need to use this editor. But we could make this functionality available in that palette.
There are LaTeX parsers for Mac and Intel, other machines
Yeah.
that are free, and if someone can do this on a regular basis, they could just do it from that. They could enter in what they want, and they would parse out tech
Yeah,
code.
my own personal feeling about that is, when I then try to enter variable names in there, things get a little bit crazy because I'm not keeping track of them like I should. Yes,
I'm sorry, is this time for comments or just questions?
questions or
Okay.
comments, I don't care, but we are only about, maybe a third, maybe halfway through
Okay.
the whole thing.
Okay,
Is it a short thing or a long thing?
very short.
Okay, go ahead.
This is a recipe for having people not use it.
Agreed.
Okay.
So this, though, is something that, if you think that this is a useful thing to ask your students to do, then we can make it easier for you to use it. Yes, no?
Well,
I'm speaking of this input right here,
Right, so
and
you
a
would rather,
non-WYSIWYG sort of input up above, and
so you would rather have the other palettes that we have available for other question types.
I think there's going to be about 10 to 20% of the faculty who are sufficient, no, that's probably too high. 5 to 10% of the faculty who are sufficiently comfortable with tech, that they're comfortable putting in questions and answers like this. And that migrating to have that palette feature, which is available on all the other question types, because it is there. It was a real project that Shane and others went through, and it's a really nice palette. It's like a Microsoft Word editor. So it's available, and it just needs to be made available on this question type as well.
Are you all familiar with the palette we're talking about?
No, I think not, but we do need to move on, but I think we need to assure everyone that it exists and it can be made here, and then it's probably useful to get your comments on that palette and how usable it is. It was made to look like Word in the sense of editing in superscripts and all that kind of stuff, but
But you can also use tech, not plain tech, LaTeX in those questions.
Wait, you can't use LaTeX?
So for those questions, well, I guess it depends.
You mean you got to switch between plain text and LaTeX?
I think it depends on which one you're doing. Shane?
It depends on which one we do. So the palette question, we've got, we've got multiple types of questions, and the palette supports, like LaTeX or HTML, or there's just a variety of things you can do. What we're looking at here with the editor is sort of the seedy underbelly that will allow you to do very, very complicated things, if that is what you so desire. You can create problems that have dozens of variables, and every student gets custom drawn charts and graphs. If you don't care for that level of sophistication in crafting a problem, then the palette editor that Sasha's telling us about is a very simple way to build problems. And yeah, it supports LaTeX, it supports HTML, and soon it can support algebraic free response. But right now, the way you craft the algebraic free response problem is using symmetrical addition.
Let's table, if I may, because I think there's lots of really
Yes,
good feedback you're getting here, but let's structure a future one of these sessions where everyone can see the various ways to actually enter in a problem. And I think that would be a good focus for another one of these. But I share your kind of looking at the clock here. We want people to see what are the kinds of questions that can be written in Mathematica and how maybe they can get their head around writing questions like that. And we can talk about implementing the problem at a later time.
So there's Web Mathematica and Mathematica give us two very powerful capabilities. One is the ability to verify these algebraic free response answers, and the other is to make these online simulations that are pretty standalone. You don't need any downloaded software for them. So for one example is that we have a tool here that asks a student to investigate how changing the parameters in this sign function, the a, the b, the c, and the d, changes the graph. So if I change a and make it littler, here's something that, so watch. If I click on it, it tells me what the value of a is currently. If I move it, notice that my graph hasn't yet changed. This is an issue that is, a difference between Mathematica and what happens when we implement this in an online environment. So it changes and updates once I've actually let go of my pointer, but it still tells me what the number was that I happened to choose. So the mechanics are that it takes the value of the slider, it sends it to the server, and the server sends back an image. So this is not a dynamic update. But I can also attach questions to these little explorations, and I can ask a student, okay, so really, how did changing A affect the graph? And there are some choices here. And how did changing B affect the graph? These are...
So what you would actually include that, I mean, we've got to get to the nitty-gritty here, how you include the Mathematica code.
Right.
You include
We
the
don't have time to do
Mathematica
that
code
today.
step, I'm sorry.
We don't have time to do that today.
If
No, I know, but
I could
the-
focus our discussion, let's try to spend our time conceptualizing what are the kinds of problems we would like as a faculty, because that can give Heather a lot of guidance on the kinds of functionalities to build out. And then we can talk
Yes.
about, again, implementing a problem.
And part of it is...
Well, I need to
what-
know for fall.
Well,
I understand
what
that,
is-
but we have, I want to structure the things we would do in a big room with a lot of people in it versus a one-on-one session with Heather on getting your question done for fall. That's what I'm trying to...
So part of this is, when we first got Web Mathematica capabilities, we really we're not exactly sure how it works and what its capabilities are. So what I have here are some of the things that it will do. You can manipulate graphs. You can also use it for, say, demonstration purposes in your class. So this is a demonstration on how cylindrical coordinates work. I have 3 parameters that I'm allowed to change at will. So again, this is the sort of thing that it gathers the parameter for theta that I've just changed, and it will update the image. So you can talk to them about how spherical, or in this case, cylindrical coordinates work, but I'm working on your spherical.
Good. You have 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's really nice, Heather.
Thank you. So, well,
It looks better in color.
I wanted to choose non-garish colors. So here, I mean, there are all kinds of things that you can do in a math context. You can also build, so this is a 3D plotting tool. So I can plot the sine of x times the sine of y from minus pi to pi in the x, from minus pi to pi in the y. Sorry about the button. And it will output for me a 3D surface that I can spin around and look at how the thing works.
Can you then go back and change that to 2 pi?
I absolutely could. Which one?
Right there.
I'm going to put in the multiplication sign just because I have cardinal rule of demos. Never touch a button you haven't touched before. But yeah,
Okay.
I
So
can
they could
change this
see
to
the
2 pi.
effect, okay.
And then you could write questions about the graph or about the representation here, which I think is really,
Just like we
Much
did with the sign transformation question. We could ask
So you
them to
could
change the
actually use
numbers.
this more than just math, because you
Yeah.
could use Mathematica to represent things that you've mathematically represented in biology, chemistry,
Yeah.
physics.
Yeah.
So you could do a ballistics problem using Mathematica where it would redraw this
Mhm.
and it would apply to other than just math students.
So here, I have a different simulation, and this one is borrowed from the Wolfram Demonstrations Project. So Wolfram, which is the maker of Mathematica and Web Mathematica, they have a demonstrations page, and this will give us some ideas about what we can do with Mathematica. So one of the things is that this is an entropy simulation. I can start with a certain number of particles in the left-hand box, a certain number of particles in the right-hand box, and I can step through updating these and see how my states change over time. Also, I'm plotting at the same time an entropy curve that tells me how disorganized my states are. So there are lots of good ideas about things that we can implement on this platform. So this is another example of a question that is tied to a Web Mathematica simulation. Here, we're asking for the eigenstates of, well, so you have a mass M, potential well of length L. Sasha, how am I doing? This is your question.
quantum mechanics problem.
Quantum mechanics problem, thank you. And I'm asking the student to report what is psi 1 of x when t is 0. And so the correct answer here is this. The reason I wrote that here is that this is what the student can put in this little box using the appropriate syntax, and it would be graded correctly and appropriately. This is totally fine for us now. We can accept these kinds of answers. And there are tons of them, because there are lots of parts to this question. But at the very, very bottom, we can ask them to plot these functions that they found above. And the punchline here is that these things are not time dependent, so that they can see, oh, I'm plotting these, they look the same whether I'm at half of my period or at t equals 0. So these, Mathematica calls them manipulates. You could also call them simulations. These are certainly embeddable in problems. The next part of this question is that you look at the superposition state, and when you graph it, so this is the quantity that I'm graphing here, and as I change t, I can watch the graph change. Appropriately exciting?
I'm pretty excited right now.
That's what I wanted.
How do I see it? Oh, T is that little tiny
T.
dot to the left there.
Yeah.
T
Okay.
is on the slider right here.
For those of us that can't see it, okay. Yeah.
Why
Do I
is
need
this,
to turn the lights off more?
No, it's just very small. I just-
Yeah, it looks better when you're not looking at it on a
So if you wanted to investigate, or then ask a series of questions of the students about the graph
Yeah.
that they can manipulate, you could now search for
Why
it.
So just in terms of interface, obviously you've created this in a linear page,
Mm-hmm.
and are you able, I'm not suggesting you use frames, but having the question next to the diagram rather than having to scroll would be a big difference.
So I'm not.
Yeah, we can-
Yes,
we can
you
change
can
that.
because you can.
Surely
make
you can
the
parse that
linear
page not
columns.
even using frames to do that, yeah.
So, oops, we didn't do very well.
You seem to have an animation feature in the last one you showed, but not in the first one, in the cylindrical coordinates one. Why was
An
that?
animation feature,
No,
like
she
making
changed
it
T.
play all
As,
by itself.
as you were changing the t, the graph was adjusting
Oh.
corresponding.
So the reason is that for that particular graph, it's actually in the code, it's a 3D graph. So changing incrementally those parameters, it's a lot for the server to regenerate the picture and send it back. But for that simple one-dimensional curve, it wasn't hard at all.
That's fine, okay. So it's a 3D problem, not a, it's not a
Yeah.
conceptual problem.
So the surface that I was wiggling around, those things, that's interesting. So those things load a plugin on your computer, and that rendering is done locally. So it was very, very fast as you wiggle it around. Okay, so those are the things that we now have using Web Mathematica. So what else do you want to see? What do you want to see it do?
Well, I think that you should, I think that showing that this could be integrated into other disciplines would go a long way.
Oh,
And-
hang on. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so we can also talk, so one of the great resources that Mathematica has is a curated database of knowledge. For example, they have all of these like substructure diagrams for molecules. You can make space filling. Whoops, where'd it go? Oh, I'm sorry, I touched the button. Show all the information, show all the edits. Anyway, they have these structures preloaded, and we can access them once our permissions are all sorted out. But we have access to this database as well. And lots of population data for states and countries.
So that access is garnered through Quest, so that the instructor doesn't have to have a Wolfram account? And obviously you're using our resident server, not the server in Colorado.
So, yeah, so right now, all of our Web Mathematica stuff is on our Quest servers.
Wait. We have a Mathematica server on campus too.
But in order to get these animations or simulations to show up within Quest, we load the files that generate them on our
Oh,
Quest
Lord.
server. So then the Quest server talks directly to them. Yes?
Well, this is sort of a question I asked last week, which is, what's the level of documentation for all of these things?
So the level of documentation for Mathematica is extensive.
Well, I know Mathematica, that's
Yeah.
not my question.
So the level of documentation for Web Mathematica, I think there's about a 300-page PDF.
Okay, fine, but what I'm really saying is, what about Quest? Okay?
So for Quest, this is
You
a
are the
cautionary
documentation.
note.
Yeah.
Huh?
You are the
Yes,
documentation.
a cautionary note. These are, we've had access to this capability for about 8 weeks.
So
And this is what we're at this point able to do. And the things that you're allowed to do here are extensive. Luckily, when you create something in Mathematica, most of the time what I've found using these things is that I can copy and paste a chunk of that right into my file and send, and
Okay.
it's mostly fine.
I think if I make a recommendation, again, I'm trying to think of myself as a faculty member. I've got a class to teach. I've got some people called PhD students I'm supposed to be supervising once in a while, and other stuff I'm supposed to do. Oh yeah, I have a job. So I think for the near term, the best thing is to visualize the kinds of questions you would like to ask, and then have yourself or then your TAs work with Heather on coding up that kind of problem and see if it looks like what you want.
Okay.
And if we get to a point where you say, yep, that's the right model, then we can document that particular thing, and Heather can work on that. But for the short term, I think what we're trying to do is pilot this. We're not
Okay,
at the stage where we even know what kinds of questions you all would like to implement.
okay, for 10 seconds, can we forget about Mathematica, okay?
Absolutely.
What if I just want to do anything on Quest?
Oh,
Is
yes,
there
I-
documentation?
Yes.
Okay, do I need a special account?
You need your EID.
That's it,
Yes.
okay.
So I think that, well, as I keep emphasizing, that if we utilized a resource, and I'm trying to decide whether you're the resource, and you might be overloaded quickly.
At this point, yes.
So if you were
But
asking for
soon,
things to
yeah.
implement, it would be to find people within departments who are Mathematica savvy, that would be able to use Mathematica's capability to represent things in chemistry, physics, biology, neurobiology, ecology, environmental studies. Then you could have a pool of questions that utilize the engine in order to see graphically what people are looking for. I think that would be the key, would be to tap resources in departments so you wouldn't get overloaded with this. But-
Well, and I think that from a content standpoint, when I was looking at this quantum something problem, sorry, I don't have the content knowledge in physics to do that question, and it's easier when you do. So absolutely, these eventually we'll get to the point where we can have experts in this kind of thing step one.
Yeah.
So you asked what we'd like to see. Some of us have about 30 years of legacy plain tech code. Now, I guess there's also a plain style sheet in LaTeX. So if we could load that, maybe that would solve our problems. But, so that's one issue we'd like to see. The other question I have is, so you've been working with this for 8 weeks. How stable is it?
I've never had this crash on me. Actually, sorry, I was reading the wrong thing. I've never had any of the Web Mathematica things that I've created just plain not work. Well, that's a lie. When I've done something wrong in the file, when it was a syntax issue, that of course didn't work, but I've never had it not work. It does look different though. I was looking at Shannon's computer and it looks a little bit different because of the way that I've sized the images. So that's something that we need to work out.
Well, I think you can also consider using the model of beta testing. And since you have a bazillion students, rather than shying away and saying somewhere down the road, what would you want? I think you should consider making this available sooner rather than later and let the students represent the problems that would show up. And so if you came up with a model saying, let's see what we can have them create. then
We
you-
tried that when we started using the physics homework server. Having naive students beta test is a disaster for the instructor. Is that fair, John?
I don't know, I'm not allowed to say.
Oh, you can say that.
We are being videotaped.
I mean, that was horrible for us.
When we first started using the old homework service, we used to hire a number of undergraduates to do things. It didn't work out particularly well. It was often more time consuming to tell them what to do, to correct what they were doing, than it was to do it oneself.
But when you have a student, when you're using this in a class and it doesn't work, and the student start asking all sorts of different questions, why isn't it working? Am I going to get partial credit?
Yeah.
We're going to drop this. It's not happy.
That's a nightmare.
Oh, well, I think what you've done is that's just the old rule of putting something up prematurely, but I'm saying you can utilize students when you're using this as an exercise. It's not the credit, when you're using it as an exercise.
I've used it in my class last semester. We were using learning modules. I had one or two students who were particularly adept at using things, doing things, looking at it, sending me errors. They were finding errors in my questions. And I tried working with one or two of them, and that worked quite well actually. They would write to me and point out errors and so on. And they're quite happy. I mean, I was trying out the CDF player with them and things like that, and they were quite good actually.
Do you all know what the CDF is? So you can take what is your normal Mathematica, not Web Mathematica, not Quest, but just normal local Mathematica. You can export it as what's called a CDF. It's like a PDF, but it's a CDF, meaning it's a computable document format. And Mathematica, Wolfram, their site has the CDF player. So you download the player just like you download Acrobat Reader, and you have your CDF player. Your
It's free as
CDF
well.
True. Your CDF players like John creates, and then your students can look at them without the use of Quest or.
This, I think, will be one of the very useful ways of. I'm particularly interested in these 3D ones for obvious reasons. Ted will know why. And if 3D doesn't work very well in Quest because you've got to have the plugin and so on, the CDF player will work, is basically Mathematica without free Mathematica.
No. that's
And you
good.
can't code in it, but you can run on any file. And so I was thinking of making some use of it, depending on how the students react.
Okay, well, in the spirit of using Mathematica and using an external server to process question types and to parse things, since you've figured out that tie-in somehow, a way to extend this and to employ this technology would be to also consider that there are programs that do similar things for other disciplines. So I'm thinking ChemDraw, I don't know that very well. Neuron is a program that allows you to manipulate the properties of Neuron. And if you were to consider similar capture of output in order to parse it, then this would become very popular. Okay. I know that there are ecology model programs out there, and that you can pull sliders and stuff like that and do the same.
Yeah, I don't see the the chemistry folks here that we're pursuing, there is quite a bit of interest in integrating with ChemDraw.
I know we have a site license with them somehow, and so that would be something to integrate other types of things other than just Mathematica, or to use Mathematica to model those things.
There are quite a lot of the math demos, the math demonstrations, in fact, many more of the math demonstrations prepared are for physics, chemistry, and biology.
Yeah, I've seen the math demo.
But the actual files that are available, I'd say that the majority of them are for physics and chemistry and biology.
Well, that's what I'm basically saying. I'm saying that if you want how to bring this to the public, how to bring it to the faculty, and encourage the faculty to be interested in this, is to show that with very little knowledge of Mathematica, they can get an idea across. It still seems like it's only one person that could find that model for them right now, the other.
But if you take the code, say you've got a CD, a file on Mathematica, what do? Do you take the code that you download from Wolfram Demo, and you just paste it into a HTML window, or what?
You can do that. We have to be careful about what we appropriate as our own.
No, I'm not, I'm just asking.
But for the most part, you take, so you're familiar with the Mathematica function manipulate, right?
Yes, yes.
There's an equivalent web Mathematica function called MSP manipulate.
Mhm.
You take your argument of manipulate and you shove it in as your argument of MSP manipulate.
And you just
And you
change the MS manipulate, okay. Go.
Yes?
But I think, you raise a really good point. I mean, I've used Neuron. It's a stunningly sophisticated program. We're not going to get a free Mathematica version of it.
There are institutes on campus that have what's nominally a site license. I think there's just a negotiation that has to happen. And I know that the EEB people have ecology programs, and seeing ecology progress. The whole idea is these things exist, the students are already using it. We're thinking about the health of Quest, and the idea is to, as rapidly as possible, parse that into Quest in some way.
So if you're saying it would be useful to investigate a license that would allow us to embed Neuron in this class, I think we can do
I
that.
think that would be huge. I think another, because that could go all the way across all of biology. I think another one would be the POP or something like that in the Hillis would know. Ask David Hillis, POP or something like that. Then obviously anything in chemistry that would allow the students to manipulate. I know that ChemDraw has an education suite where you move a moiety from one end to the other. As long as it's housed in Quest, it doesn't really matter how simple the input or output is. It doesn't matter if you can get it at home. It's in Quest. And the idea is that it's there, and then you have Quest questions next to the thing that's moving.
Right.
So all you're doing is forcing students to use a program that they would be forced otherwise to use, but this becomes a central clearinghouse.
Absolutely. What we wanted is to put as many learning tools into this thing, so you have a single place to go. The worst thing is when you have to have a separate web page open on the side, the students are manipulating over the side, and then you're supposed to answer questions over here. That's kind of lame. Right?
Yeah, so that's why putting the question right by the graph would be great, and then, have whatever the output window is. And I think I would just go to everybody. I would go to environmental studies and say what software do you have and see what's there.
Yeah.
It seems like sort of a driving factor of this is that you're having the program grade for you. Is there any hope of getting, long answer questions in that the TA then grades?
Yeah.
That's good.
It's on the list for this month.
Yeah, within a week or two, we'll have something that can give us feedback on and
Great.
lead to production.
One of the things I've heard about as sort of state of the art is in that kind of file upload, I'll call it, kind of feature, is you have to create an environment for the TA to go into where they're viewing a student record of some sort, whatever, a long essay. There's a way to enter a score over here on the side on the spreadsheet, and then scroll to the next student thing, and the student record spreadsheet scrolls down, just to make this as seamless a process as possible. Because we can do something really crude, but then you've got piles and piles of files to be looking through, and it takes more time to manage all the files. And you want to make it inherit some of those nice features like admissions offices have, where they can literally screen through thousands of PDF files and then enter comments about whether or not they admit the student. So that's, I think, what everyone's working on right now.
Excellent.
To make that seamless.
Shane, that my push for this is as a self-learning tool, and we've talked about what I was doing. But another thing to consider that you could probably implement very quickly that would be useful in Mathematica type applications would be to have peer review of the work or So peer-reviewed work or homework or where they can work as groups or something along those lines. And I'm not sure how you would do that, but right now it seems to be single instance. And
It is, and certainly collaboration is something that, you hear all about everywhere you go.
that's what I want. And, but, I just don't even know where you use that at the
Well,
moment.
the first steps are open input where they can type large, open-ended questions that at least the TA can evaluate.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. If you can find a way to store for TA, then you should be able to make it anonymous, and then allow the students to do peer review, say close from the cigar, and then add comments. So maybe that would be a good thing. It would be less intimidating for them to, and they would like Quest if they got they said, this is not the TA or the instructor, but this is your peers telling you, I don't know if maturity levels there or not.
Well, behind the scenes, we would know what EID had entered, whatever.
That's true. It doesn't seem to
Inappropriate
stop them, but
things,
yeah,
but,
anyway.
yeah.
Other questions? All right, guess we're done.
Anonymous.
I'm tired.
So you can use them.
Actually, I created an alternative that's called Requested. And now I'm being asked to put it back into Quest, so I've been talking with Shane. I'm interested in using this as not as an evaluation tool, but as a self-organizing. What it does is it takes a